At the top of the 40th floor, surrounded by mirrored glass and the constant sound of digital notifications, Ethan Walker watched over London as if it were a chessboard. Everything there had logic, control, order. Nothing entered or exited his routine without permission. But that day, something broke the pattern, and it wasn't a system error. Subscribe to the channel and help us grow. Like, comment, and share. This helps us a lot and motivates us to keep bringing more enchanting stories to you. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. The phone rang, an unknown number. He almost ignored it, as he did with everything that wasn't scheduled in his agenda. But something made him answer. "Ethan, it's me, Isabel." The name hit him like an unauthorized memory, a name that hadn't been spoken in over a decade. A voice he thought he had buried along with the parts of life he chose to forget. "We need to talk. It's urgent. You're the father of my children. They're 11 years old, and one of them is very sick." Time stopped. The sound of typing ceased. The air vanished. And for a moment, not even the helicopters flying over the buildings could break the silence that filled the room. Ethan didn't answer. He just held the phone as if it weighed a ton. On the other end, Isabel's voice hesitated, but continued. "His name is Oliver, and he needs heart surgery. Urgently. I don't know who else to turn to." Ethan looked out at the city he believed he had under control. But in that call, there was a life, two actually, that he never knew existed, and one of them was hanging by a thread. He hung up without promising anything, but he was already on his feet. Ethan Walker's story doesn't begin with heroism or redemption. It begins with control. A man who learned early on that emotions are noise, distractions, flaws in the system. CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the UK, Ethan turned pain into productivity, the past into silence, love into absence. That's how he won. Every day at the same cafe next to the office, he ordered a double espresso with no sugar. He greeted the same 3 employees with the same neutral expression, rode the same glass elevator, typed in the same code, sat in the same chair, looked out at the same skyline. Routine was his fortress, and behind it, no one entered. Until that phone call. Isabel Carter. The name wasn't just a ghost, it was a torn-out chapter of his own story. Years ago, Ethan and Isabel shared something intense, real, even dangerous. A love that threatened the rigidity of his plans. Then one day she disappeared. No letter, no explanation. She just vanished. And he never searched for her. Now, he had discovered that out of that disappearance, 2 lives had emerged. And one of them was in danger. He didn't know what he would find. Didn't know if Isabel hated him, if the children would reject him, if there was any way to fix what he didn't know he had broken. But he knew one thing. He needed to go. To be there, to look into the eyes of that boy, his son, and do something, anything. Because for the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't thinking about profits or mergers or source code. He was thinking about a heart and hoping he wasn't too late. The London sky had begun to turn gray, and the city pulsed at its usual frantic pace, cars rushing through avenues, people lost in their own headphones. At the center of this technological universe, Ethan Walker reigned supreme. His name was synonymous with innovation. At 42, he was the founder and CEO of Helix Systems, one of the most powerful companies in the UK, leading advancements in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and urban automation. The media called him a visionary, a modern genius, the architect of tomorrow. But behind the titles and headlines, there was a man few truly knew. Ethan woke up every day at exactly 5:15 a.m., ran on the treadmill for 45 minutes while monitoring real-time performance charts from the company. Black coffee, cold shower, tailored shirt, blazer without a wrinkle. His driver took him straight to the mirrored skyscraper of Helix, a building he had designed himself, minimalist, cold, functional, with sensors that adjusted the lighting based on his mood, though no one had ever seen him smile. In the elevator, he rarely spoke. His employees admired him, but feared his presence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. One look was enough to shift the direction of a meeting. His desk was spotless. No papers, no photos, no distractions. Everything was in the cloud, in the algorithm, in the plan. He lived for the future, a future he controlled with surgical precision. There was no room for surprises or memories. He had no family, at least not in the way most people understood it. His mother, Margaret Walker, was a ruthless businesswoman, widowed early, who raised him with an iron will and sharp words. From a young age, Ethan learned that emotion was weakness, vulnerability a gateway to failure. He followed that teaching like a code of conduct. He never married, never had pets. His relationships lasted exactly between one international conference and the next investment round. Ethan was admired, but he was alone. The loneliness, however, was comfortable, predictable. Within it, he had control. No partners betrayed him, no friends disappointed him, no memory hurt, at least not for long, until that phone call. Until Isabel's voice cut through the layers of silence and security he'd built over a decade. That morning, while his executives discussed quarterly goals in a meeting room filled with LED panels and animated charts, Ethan wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the void. Something had shifted inside him. A crack. Small, but irreversible. He turned off the tablet, asked for the rest of his agenda to be cancelled, ignored the surprised glances and hesitant objections. "I'm leaving. Personal matter," he said curtly, before walking down the silent corridors. No one insisted. No one ever did. And so, for the first time in many years, Ethan Walker stopped following the plan and began following instinct. At exactly 2:17 p.m., Ethan Walker's private jet took off from London, bound for Edinburgh. The sky, cloudy and quiet, reflected the inner state of a man used to controlling everything, except what he felt in that moment. Inside the cabin, comfort was absolute. Italian leather, high-speed internet, airtight silence. But none of it could drown out the voice echoing over and over in his mind. "They're 11. One of them is very sick. Oliver." The name was no longer just a fact. It was a weight, a knot. Ethan tried to focus. Opened his laptop, read reports that made no sense, tried to organize the information like he did with any crisis. But this wasn't a business merger. It was the life of a boy, his son. And what consumed him the most wasn't the revelation itself, but the lost time, 11 years. Ethan couldn't structure his thoughts the way he did with monthly reports or financial projections. For the first time in years, there was chaos, there was doubt, there was fear, and above all, there was the overwhelming feeling that something very important was about to happen. Something he couldn't control, delete or postpone. He looked out the window. The clouds below formed an abstract landscape. For years, he had ignored any trace of the past that might interfere with his ascent. Now, he realized that while he was amassing billions, someone had been growing up not knowing who he was. Someone with his blood. What Isabel didn't say, or perhaps did and he simply couldn't process, was whether this boy knew about him, whether he hated him, whether he even wanted to meet him. Ethan landed in Edinburgh by late afternoon. A driver waited with his name on a sign, but this time it wasn't a smiling executive or a business partner at the airport. It was just a stranger, taking him toward a completely different reality. On the way to the hospital, the streets of Edinburgh passed by like an old film. He hadn't set foot in the city in over a decade. The last time had been with Isabel, on a short trip, when everything still felt simple, or at least seemed to. The car stopped in front of a sober building with classic architecture and grey walls. Royal Hospital for Children and Young People. The name made him swallow hard. He stepped out of the car like someone walking into battle without armor. In the hospital lobby, the smell of antiseptic, the sound of heart monitors, and the hurried steps of doctors created a world that had nothing in common with the glass offices Ethan was used to. Here, no one was trying to save companies. They were trying to save lives. He gave his name at the front desk. The receptionist hesitated for a moment, then looked at a printed paper beside her. Ms. Isabel Carter is on the second floor, pediatric wing, room 214. He climbed the stairs as if each step were made of lead. In the hallway, he saw children in pajamas, exhausted parents, toys forgotten on waiting room chairs. Reality hit him like a wave of ice-cold water. When he reached door 214, he didn't knock right away. He stood there for a moment, listening to muffled voices. One was female, firm and gentle, Isabel. The other, a child's, tired but alive. It was him. With his hand on the doorknob, he hesitated. Part of him wanted to run, get in the elevator, return to the jet, resume his life as if nothing had happened. But something kept him there. It wasn't guilt. It was presence. It was need. He took a deep breath and entered. The room was simple, lit by the fading light of the afternoon. A boy with brown hair and pale skin lay in the bed, wires connected to his chest. Beside him, a woman with steady eyes and a tired expression turned toward him. It was Isabel. Time hadn't erased who she was. It had only hardened her edges. She said nothing, just looked at him. And in that moment, without a word, Ethan understood. He wasn't there as a CEO, not as someone trying to fix a problem. He was there because he was a father, and he had just arrived late to the most important part of his own story. The silence between them seemed to occupy more space than the room itself. Isabel stood up from the chair beside the bed and faced Ethan, as if time hadn't passed, as if they were frozen in an unresolved moment from 11 years ago. Her eyes said everything: exhaustion, restrained anger, and an old pain that still pulsed. Oliver was asleep, breathing with the help of thin tubes connected to oxygen. His cheeks pale, his chest rising and falling with effort. Ethan looked at him with the confusion of someone seeing himself reflected in a mirror he doesn't recognize. He was his son, his blood, and at the same time, a complete stranger. "You want answers?" Isabel finally said, her voice a steady whisper. "But you won't find them all here. This is just the end of a very long story." She led him out of the room, closing the door gently so as not to wake Oliver. They walked down a quiet corridor to a small waiting room. Isabel sat down, but Ethan remained standing, as if sitting meant surrendering, as if he were trying to hold on to a control he had already completely lost. "I looked for you, Ethan," she began without hesitation. "For weeks, after everything happened. I called, sent messages, went to your old apartment. But you were gone." Ethan frowned. "I never got anything, Isabel. Nothing. You disappeared." She laughed bitterly. "I didn't disappear. I was silenced." There was a pause. A moment when the air felt heavy. "Margaret came to my house. You didn't know. I was 3 months pregnant when she showed up. She said you'd never accept it, that it would destroy your career, that I was putting your life at risk. She offered me money, Ethan, to disappear. Told me that if I really loved you, I'd leave." He stepped back. His mother's name struck like a whip. Margaret Walker. The woman who had shaped his life with strategic coldness, who always knew what to say, how to manipulate, how to protect the family legacy at any cost. "I didn't take the money," Isabel continued, her voice trembling with contained indignation. "But I got the message. I thought you had sent her, that it was what you wanted. So I disappeared. I came to Edinburgh. I raised them both on my own." Ethan finally sat down, as if his legs could no longer carry the weight of the revelation. His mind spun in circles. His mother, the woman who had always promised to protect him from everything, even from love. "Why didn't you try again?" he asked, his voice almost childlike. "Why didn't you try one more time?" Isabel took a deep breath. "Because I needed to protect myself, and protect them. Every year that passed, it got harder. Time builds layers of fear, Ethan. Fear of reopening wounds, fear of not being heard, fear of discovering that you really didn't want to know." He had no response, only memories. Flashbacks hit him in disjointed waves. Isabel smiling in a Notting Hill cafe, the smell of her hair after the rain, an unseen ultrasound, an unexplained absence. Everything now made sense, and at the same time nothing did. "They're beautiful," she said, voice heavy with emotion. "Lily and Oliver, smart, sensitive, and completely different from you, because they didn't learn to be afraid of feeling." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. The emotional wall he had built with so much discipline had begun to crack. It wasn't just guilt, it was loss. The loss of what could have been, of what he could have been. When he opened his eyes again, Isabel was looking at him. There was pain, yes, but there was also a small glimmer of reconciliation, or perhaps just civility. But it was something. And in that moment, in the middle of that hospital in Edinburgh, Ethan Walker was no longer the most powerful man in tech. He was just someone trying to piece together a story he never knew was his. The hallway back to the room felt narrower. The silence between Ethan and Isabel was now a different silence. Not absence, but uncomfortable presence, weighed down by everything left unsaid for 11 years. When they opened the door again, Lily was there. Sitting in a chair beside her brother's bed, she held a tablet on her lap, but wasn't looking at the screen. Her eyes were fixed on Ethan, with the piercing clarity of someone who had already understood more than she wanted to. "So it's you?" she asked, before any adult could say a word. Ethan froze. There was something eerily familiar in the way she spoke. Cold, direct, like him. "Yes, it's me," he replied, trying to soften his tone. "You're Oliver's dad. And mine too, right?" The question wasn't a question, it was a test, as if she wanted to hear it from his mouth, to confirm what she already knew, just to see if he'd have the courage. "Yes, Lily, I am." She nodded slowly, then turned her eyes back to her brother. Ethan took a few hesitant steps into the room. Isabel remained by the door, as if that space was now neutral ground, or a minefield. "Are you going to stay or disappear again?" Lily asked, still without looking at him. The question cut deeper than any revelation before. There was no bitterness in her voice, just fact, as if she had already accepted that adults vanish. "I didn't know you existed," Ethan said, trying to find steadiness in his voice. "But now I do, and I don't plan on leaving." Lily stared at him, wary. "My mom said you were busy, that your life was full of priorities. So if this is just a visit to ease your conscience, you can go now. We've already learned not to depend on anyone." Ethan felt a sharp sting. He wanted to say something, explain, promise what he wasn't even sure he could deliver. But the truth was, Lily didn't want promises. She wanted proof, and he had none. Oliver opened his eyes, weak but alert. A small smile formed at the corner of his mouth when he saw his sister. Then his gaze shifted to the strange man in the room, the stranger who, somehow, looked like him. "Who's that?" he murmured, barely audible. Isabel approached the bed and gently touched her son's forehead. "That's Ethan. He's your dad." Oliver blinked slowly. There was no shock, no tears, just sleepy curiosity. "You're really my dad?" Ethan knelt by the bed so he could be at eye level. Oliver's eyes had the same blue-gray tone as his own, small, fragile mirrors. "Yes, and I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." Oliver looked at him for a few more seconds, then closed his eyes again, exhausted. But before drifting off, he whispered, "I dreamed about you last night, but you had a beard and a weird hat." Ethan chuckled, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Well, maybe I'm late, even in dreams." Lily watched everything closely but didn't soften. There was a wall there, one that wouldn't fall with just a conversation and a smile. "He's having surgery tomorrow," Isabel said, breaking the silence. "The doctor said it's complicated. I asked if he could die. He didn't answer." Isabel sat beside her children, taking a deep breath. There was an old exhaustion in her body, but also the strength of someone who had carried two worlds alone for years. "He's going to be okay," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. Ethan stood again. He looked at the three of them, Isabel, Lily, Oliver, and felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Even if it was late, even if it was hard, now he had to earn the right to stay. The room was wrapped in dim light when dawn came. The half-closed window let in only a soft glow from the city, while the monitors beside Oliver's bed beeped rhythmically, hypnotic and terrifying. Ethan hadn't slept. Sitting in a hard, straight-backed chair, he watched his son in silence, as if memorizing every detail of his face, afraid it might be the last time. Isabel slept on a makeshift couch on the other side of the room. Lily, wrapped in a blanket, slept gently beside her brother. But Ethan remained there, motionless. His phone was off. Emails piled up. Company alerts flashed. He ignored them all. For the first time in years, nothing else mattered. At 5:14 a.m., the doctor entered. "We're taking him in 20 minutes, he said softly, careful not to wake the others. "You can walk him to the OR door if you want." Ethan nodded, but didn't answer immediately. Only when Isabel stirred, her eyes red, her body stiff from tension, did he stand. "It's going to be okay," he said. But Isabel didn't respond. She just approached the bed and gently touched her son's face, then looked at Ethan and said, "He needs to feel you're here. Now, more than ever." Minutes later, 2 nurses came in with the stretcher. Oliver slowly opened his eyes, groggy from medication. When he saw Ethan there holding his hand, he gave a faint smile. "You stayed?" "And I'm staying," Ethan replied, gently squeezing his small fingers. As they walked down the corridor toward the operating room, Ethan's chest tightened like never before. The sound of the stretcher wheels, the hum of hospital lights, the anonymous faces in blue uniforms. It all felt so real, so far from his usual world, so utterly human. They stopped in front of the double doors. One of the nurses asked them to say goodbye there. Isabel kissed Oliver's forehead. Lily, now awake, gripped her brother's hand tightly. But Oliver looked at Ethan. "You'll wait for me." Ethan knelt again, just like the first time. Oliver's eyes were heavy, but something was there. A trust that had just begun to grow, even on uncertain ground. "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said. "I promise. When you wake up, I'll be here waiting." Oliver nodded, already being taken away. The doors closed slowly, with a muffled thud, and suddenly, there was only emptiness. Isabel sat on the bench in the hallway. Lily stood, hugging herself. Ethan remained on his feet, staring at the space where his son had disappeared. Something inside him collapsed. "I've never been this scared before," he said quietly. "Not when I signed billion-dollar contracts. Not in courtrooms, with investors, with cyber threats. But now it feels like everything that matters depends on one surgical room. On hands I don't even know." Isabel looked at him. For the first time, there was no anger. There was recognition. Shared pain. "Now, do you understand what's at stake?" she asked. Ethan sat down beside her. His trembling hands rested on his knees. He looked at Lily, who turned her gaze away. The girl still challenged him, but there was something in her eyes, a beginning of a crack in the armor. "I failed you, all of you," he said, without hiding. "But I'm here, and if he makes it, if he lives, I will spend the rest of my life proving I deserve to be with you." Outside, the sun had begun to rise, painting the sky in golden and pink hues. But for Ethan, that sunrise was more than just the start of a new day. It was a chance to begin again. If Oliver survived, nothing would be the same. He truly hoped that the son he had just met would come out of that operating room alive. The wall clock read 7:42 a.m. when Ethan's phone vibrated for the first time that morning. He hesitated for a moment before picking it up. The screen showed a name he hadn't seen in months, Margaret Walker. His mother, architect of control, origin in prison. He stepped away from the quiet hallway and went down to the hospital's lower lobby, where the sounds of footsteps and muffled voices softened the tension. He answered the call, leaning against a cold stone wall. "Ethan," said the voice on the other end, with that refined and polished tone that always felt like an order disguised as affection. "You finally answered. I was worried." He closed his eyes. For a moment, he felt 15 again, being told not to cry at his father's funeral. "Strong men don't give in," she used to say. "You will become what he couldn't be." And he did. But at what cost? "I'm in Edinburgh," he replied bluntly. There was a pause on the other end. "I know. I called your assistant. She told me you left Helix yesterday. I assumed it had something to do with Isabel." The name came laced with judgment, with restrained contempt, as if it was something filthy she was trying to erase from her vocabulary. "She told me everything," Ethan said. "That you went to her, that you offered money, that you said I didn't want to know." Margaret didn't answer immediately. Her silence was more calculated than surprised. "I did what any mother would do, Ethan. I protected you. That woman would have ruined your life. You were about to be promoted. That scandal would have destroyed your reputation. I simply handled what needed to be done." "It wasn't your decision," he replied, his voice low but firm. "It never was." Margaret sighed on the other end, a soft sound, but heavy with condescension. "Do you really think you would have achieved everything you have today if you'd had 2 kids at 31, with a woman who lacked stability? You wouldn't be where you are. And with all due respect, neither would she be emotionally alive if you had tried to split your attention between her and your shareholders. I spared you a breakdown. You might not see it now, but one day you'll thank me. I lost 11 years, Mom." The phrase hung in the air, hard and absolute. 11 years. Margaret then shifted her tone, realizing she had lost control and trying to regain it with forced sweetness. "Ethan, my love, you still have time to fix this. Come back to London. Hire a lawyer. We can resolve everything civilly. You can support the child, of course, but there's no need to get emotionally involved. You have a reputation, an empire, a mission, and a family," he said, cutting her off. Margaret fell silent again. "I have a family, Mom. One that you tried to erase, and I let you. But I won't let you manipulate my decisions anymore." That sentence wasn't just a choice. It was a break. "This time, I'm choosing my life," he finished. "And my life is with them, not with you in control." "You'll regret this," she said at last, coldly. "Maybe. But at least it'll be my regret, not yours." And he hung up. Slowly, Ethan slipped the phone into his pocket. His heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear. It was freedom. For the first time, he had said no to the woman who had shaped every step he took. He had cut the invisible cord that always pulled him back to the zone of control. When he returned to the pediatric floor, he found Lily sitting in a chair, reading a book. She looked up at him over the pages, assessing him. "Someone important?" she asked. Ethan thought for a moment before answering. She was, not anymore. And in that moment, without realizing it, he spoke the words that would define the rest of his life. Hours had passed since Oliver had gone into surgery. Time seemed distorted inside that hospital, as if the minutes were stretched, as if the outside world had been put on pause. Ethan paced back and forth down the hallway of the pediatric wing, hands in his pockets, brow furrowed, steps contained. Every time a door opened, his body reacted, but the doctors who came out were never the ones operating on Oliver. Isabel sat in the same chair from the beginning, her face hidden in her hands, her body still like a statue carved out of tension and exhaustion. Lily beside her said nothing. She just stared at the floor with tearful but firm eyes, as if she had decided not to cry, as if she didn't want to give the world a chance to think she was weak. Then, at 12:03 p.m., the door to the surgical room opened. A surgeon in a mask and cap stepped out, his face tired but calm. family of Oliver Carter. Everyone stood at once. Ethan felt the ground disappear beneath him for a moment. "The surgery was a success," said the doctor, his voice calm. "The procedure was long, but everything went as expected. He's under observation, and over the next 24 hours we'll monitor him closely. But he's out of danger." Isabel broke down in tears, unable to respond. Lily covered her face with her hands. Ethan didn't know what to do for a moment. Then he simply moved closer, knelt beside Isabel, and embraced her. She didn't resist. For the first time in many years, they allowed themselves to be in the same space, broken. Not out of anger, not out of guilt, but out of relief. A relief that came late, but still came. Later, in the recovery room, Oliver slept deeply, his vital signs stable, his face rosier, his breathing steady. Isabel gently stroked his hair in silence. Lily was scribbling something in a notebook she'd gotten from the front desk. Ethan stood by the window, watching the Edinburgh sky turn blue between the gray clouds. He turned and looked at the three of them. For the first time, he didn't feel like an intruder there. He wasn't yet a full part of that small constellation, but he had been admitted into its solar system. Isabel watched him for a moment, then spoke in a soft but firm voice. "Thank you for not leaving, for..." He replied without hesitation, "Never again." Lily looked up from her notebook. "You talk like you're going to live here." "Maybe I will," Ethan said, surprising even himself with the naturalness of the phrase. She raised an eyebrow. "Isn't London going to explode without you?" "Maybe it will," he replied with a smile. "But if it does, let it. Helix can survive without me for a while. My children can't." The silence that followed was unlike any before. It wasn't tense or bitter. It was full of possibility. Lily closed her notebook and slowly walked over. She held it out to him. "I made this for you." Ethan took the notebook carefully. On the cover, a pencil drawing. A man in a suit, a smiling woman, a boy in a hospital bed, and a girl with crossed arms, but with a faint smile at the corner of her lips. Above them, written in large, uneven letters, "Carter Walker Family." Ethan couldn't speak, he just nodded. Hard, like someone receiving a gift they never knew they wanted. In the corner of the room, Isabel watched it all. Her eyes were calmer. There was exhaustion, but also peace. She knew the days ahead would still bring uncertainty, adjustments, difficult conversations. But in that moment, one thing was undeniable. The first step had been taken. Ethan Walker was there, and now, finally, completely. The late afternoon sun filtered through the treetops of Meadows Park, casting golden light on the freshly cut grass. The distant sound of children playing, birds singing, and leaves rustling created a gentle soundtrack for a moment that, for Ethan, felt surreal. There, in the heart of Edinburgh, far from the glass towers of London, he experienced something that never appeared on his schedules or in his productivity reports. Presence. Seated around a wooden picnic table, Isabel, Lily, and Oliver ate simple sandwiches hastily packed at the hospital cafe. Ethan held a cup of apple juice, watching his children with a look that teetered between fascination and reverence. Oliver still had a light blanket over his shoulders, but his face was rosy, his eyes bright. Lily was telling some random story about a funny teacher or a science experiment gone wrong that had everyone laughing. Even Isabel, between bites, laughed with her head thrown back like she used to. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he'd heard a genuine laugh. The moment was simple, yet filled with meaning. An improvised lunch outdoors with people who now meant everything to him. And even without knowing what tomorrow would bring, for the first time in a long while, today felt like enough. "So you're really opening an office here?" Lily asked suspiciously, holding a piece of bread in her hand. Ethan nodded, still smiling. "A branch of Helix in Edinburgh. It'll start small, about 10 employees, nothing too big, but enough so I can truly be here." Lily narrowed her eyes at him. Does that mean you'll pick us up from school? If you want me to, yes. She pretended to think for a moment, then shrugged, hiding a smile. Okay, just don't show up in a suit. You'll scare the other kids. Deal, he replied, laughing. Oliver looked at his father, eyes shining. And will you teach me how to code? Of course. We'll build something together. You choose. A game? An app? Even a robot if you want. A robot that does my homework, Oliver said excitedly. A robot that does everything, except cheating, Isabel corrected, laughing along. A soft breeze lifted strands of Isabel's hair. Ethan looked at her with a mix of gratitude and regret. For everything they hadn't lived. For everything they still might. She held his gaze for a few seconds, then looked away, but with a faint smile. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the beginning of a path. You know, she said, fidgeting with a paper napkin, I thought you'd show up, look at them, feel guilty, and leave. I thought so too, Ethan admitted. But when I saw his eyes, I saw mine, and I saw what I could have lost. That, you don't forget. Isabel nodded, saying nothing more. Lily stood up and ran toward a nearby carousel. Oliver followed with slow but determined steps. Ethan watched them, feeling a warmth in his chest that no professional victory had ever brought him. He then reached his hand across the table, hesitant. Isabel looked down, then placed hers over his. Simple, no promises, no plans, just the gesture. Time seemed to slow down. There was no future to control, no past to fix. Only that moment. Ethan looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, and allowed himself, for the first time in years, to close his eyes without fear of what came next. At that table, in the park beside the hospital, holding hands with the woman he once loved, and maybe still did, and with his children running under the fading afternoon light, Ethan Walker finally understood that this was his chance to rebuild his family. It wasn't the restart he had expected. It was the beginning he never knew he needed. If this story touched your heart, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe here at Enchanting Stories, where every video is an emotional journey. Join our growing community, full of people passionate about great stories, and a few dramatic twists too, right? Click the bell because more stories are coming that will make your heart beat faster. And don't forget to comment down below. From which magical city in the world are you watching us? Who knows? The next story might happen right there. See you in the next chapter. May life surprise you like a good script with a happy ending.